All right, welcome to Unit 1 and 2, Day 2. Today we're going to be talking about what an inverse is. An inverse operation is doing the opposite of what we would expect. So let me give you a little bit of a kind of an idea what that means. So just in general, what an inverse is, if I'm doing, let's say, x plus 3, then the inverse of that would be to do minus 3. To cancel that out. So for instance, if I'm doing, if you've all solved equations, so if you do like 3x plus 4 over 2 equals 8, for example, then you all solve equations by doing inverse operations. So the first step to solve that would be to multiply both sides by 2. Why do we do that? Because this side is being divided by 2, and we want to get x by itself. So we have to first undo the fraction. So we would do 3x plus 4 equals 8 times 2. So we bring that 2 up here and multiply it. And that's going to give you 3x plus 4 equals 16. The next inverse operation is to undo the plus 4. And so we would subtract 4. And that's going to give you 3x equals 16 minus 4, which is 12. And, finally, when we solve the equation, we would divide by 3, and the inverse of multiplication is division. So divide by 3. X is going to be 12 divided by 3. So x would equal 4. That's all inverse. Every step that you use to solve an equation is using an inverse operation to undo what was done. So that's what we're doing with our tables and graphs and our functions. An inverse function is simply undoing what was done. So if you have a function, and for our purposes, let's call our y values f of x, then the x and y values are going to switch. So the inverse operation, for -3, -8, we're not changing any signs. We're simply going to switch places. So that's going to be -8 first, followed by -3. And the same thing here, -4, -1, 3, 0, 7, 2, -1, 3. So if you go down, when we're trying to find, let's say, what is f in this little -1 symbol, that means inverse. And so what we're looking for here is not necessarily we're not raising anything to the negative first power. What we're doing is we are switching the x and y values, and we're basically plugging in that y value, not the x value. So if you look at the original table, we don't, if it says f inverse of -1, we don't go to the x value of -1, we go to the y value of -1, and we report our x value. So we find the y value, and we report x value at that y value. So since the y value at -1, the x value is 3, that means f inverse of -1 is going to be equal to 3. Or, since we switched the table up, you could also look at it from here. Since we switched the order, you can look at where x is now -1 here. My inverse of -1 is going to be 3. And the same thing applies to this. This little -1 still means inverse. So we're going to switch x and y. We're going to find the y value of, in this case, +3. and we're going to report our x value at that y value, so that our x value is going to be 0. Or if you look at 3, since we switched the x and y here, is our x value in the inverse function, our output is going to be 0. Okay, I would like you to pause the video and look at the try on your own. See if you can write the inverse function and find the values from the outputs here for the inverse values at 1 and 6. Again, pause, try on your own. Okay, so for starters, when I write an inverse function, you know, the x and y values, they go in order. So x, y, x, y, x, y, x, y. So writing this inverse function, remember that little -1 means inverse, and inverse means switch x and y. Our function is going to look like this. It's going to say 5, -2. 6, -8. 1, -4. And 9, 1. And you can write it as a table. You could write it just as a set of points. That's really up to you, but make sure you have these points for your inverse function. So for these two parts, we want to find the output in the inverse function at 1, and this is the same thing really. This is g -1 inverse of 6. So we want to find the output at 1 and 6. So we're going to either go to our original function and look at the y value. This is a y value. In the original function, this is a y value. And we're going to report our x value. We're going to report our x value. So at y of 1, our x value is going to be -4. At y of 6, our x value is going to be -8. So looking at tables and points, that's how we do inverses. Our next video will look at graphs.